past the hour, so
Right.
it's good to me, Lisa.
Thank you, Deborah.
All right. So thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Deborah McGrath. I'm a Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager with ServiceNow, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. And today's webinar, you're going to hear about ServiceNow ITBM and GRC, or Integrated Risk Management, and how they work better together. Joining me to do the presentation are Greg Kahn, a GRC Advisory Solution Consultant, and Doug Page, Senior Principal Product Manager for ITBM. So Doug, if you want to advance to the next screen. So what we're going to see today, Greg and Doug will be showing you how the new APM to GRC integration app reduces the amount of effort required to manage application risks, and how it helps ensure operational resiliency for business applications by helping you apply the right assessment, identification of controls, and attestation of remediation. We'll then take a look at how project managers and enterprise risk managers can assess project risks using an advanced risk assessment form, so they can calculate any inherent and residual project risks and view those assessed risks on a dashboard and a risk heat map. And then finally, we'll see how the GRC Advanced Audit app makes it easier for audit engagement managers to manage the audit as a project for a better audit execution experience. So Doug, I'll hand it over to you now to kick it off.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. So we're going to start with how ServiceNow can help organizations use APM and IRM together to manage the risk lifecycle. But first, let's start with three major problems that organizations are dealing with. The first is the growing number of applications. All organizations see this. Different parts of the organization are purchasing their own applications now. So we see a large increase in the number of apps. We also see a growing number of threat actors, people who are trying to get access to information that is housed within these applications. And because of that, there's also a third problem, which there is more regulatory guidance or governance around these applications and how organizations have to handle this information. What's also happening at the same time, because of this increase in number of applications, is actually the increase in application spend. So in 2021, that went up by 8.8%, and Gartner's assessment is that in 2022, this is going to go up by more than 10%. So we're just going to ask Greg to come on now and talk about the life cycle.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. So having said all that you said about the impact and the privacy concerns around data and everything associated with that, you have to manage the risks and the controls and the compliance and everything around those applications. And what ServiceNow does really well is to bring those workflows right to the end users. And we're going to use this lifecycle around this, where in normal days we would do this with phone calls and emails and spreadsheets, putting things out on SharePoint. And to get visibility around all of that and get that workflow together was often difficult sometimes. And so we want to do that starting right away with the application questionnaire that gets triggered right when an application comes on board, or you can do it on an annual basis, right, to understand what's going on from a confidentiality and integrity and availability impact or privacy. We take that and do a business impact analysis over in the security world to say, what is this application bringing to my risk landscape and risk posture, right? Let's look at that business impact and see how risks are impacting this environment based on what this application owner is telling me about this application and the data behind it, right? That data is what's important. And then we go into those controls and looking at those controls. And every now and then we're going to have second or third line doing the control assessment. And this process really brings that first, second, and third line of defenses together into one workflow and one application. When we talk about this, getting that benefit, you talked about that cost, right? Bringing that effort down for those risk managers, providing information out to that business unit, the stakeholders that are involved, where is my compliance today? We'll show you that dashboard, that real-time reporting that we've got, Doug, on the platform that we utilize, that performance analytics, and get insights into that business criticality around that and where my risks are within my applications.
And there are really three key personas that are part of this process that Greg just showed at a high level. The first is the IT risk manager, and they're the person who is really responsible from the risk side for application risk. They're going to decide the business impact analysis score for the application. They're going to identify and implement the necessary controls for those applications. So it's really from an enterprise risk perspective to say, based on the information we have around these risks, what do we need to do to ensure that they're governed properly? At the same time, we also have the application owner. They're going to be the primary point of contact for these applications, and they're the ones providing the information to the risk team to say, hey, this is what this application does, and here's what we do with it today. And then finally, there's the business owner. They're the sponsor who's responsible for the application, and they're going to monitor it on a periodic basis. So this is a high-level flow that we're going to walk you through. You don't have to look at this all at once. We're actually going to build this out, and this is a detailed view of the flow that Greg had just showed in that circular view. But we're really going to start here with the creation of a business application within ServiceNow. And we have out-of-the-box catalog items that allow us to register a business application. So if we go into then what happens next is, and Greg, sorry, I'll hand this over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So right when that business application is created, it triggers a workflow within ServiceNow, right? That automatically starts reaching into the GRC, the IRM world to create that entity. And we're going to throw over a questionnaire to the application owner right within the application, right? So if you go to the next, you can see as we start to move through this, here I'm in APM, right? And I've got all this feature-rich data within APM that tells me all kinds of things about this application. You'll notice that this risk questionnaire is part of this as soon as this gets associated to, but pause here just for a second, Doug. You notice I've got up there where it says contains PCI on it. I've got controls already associated with this. I've got an attestation. This is just baseline stuff that can be brought into an application without even going through a risk questionnaire. So these are baseline controls that says, hey, any application, you're going to have these baseline controls. So let's start there and provide that visibility right away. But this application questionnaire is going to start driving some of this risk identification. So go ahead and step through the next. And this is where we become that application owner, right, to answer these questions around that. So this is where you, Doug, as an application owner, you're going to answer those questions. And these questions can be dynamic based on your environment and what you want to ask. We have some out-of-box questionnaires around it. But think about this being on anything that's happening within your environment, not just an application, but it could be if I'm implementing changes within my environment, send out a questionnaire based on changes and what's the impact of that. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that you're going to start seeing some of these questions.
Yeah, and I think for the application owner, one of the real benefits is that they're doing this in context of where they're already viewing their applications. They don't have to go to another system or somewhere else to do this. This is all in context for them.
Right. We had a question it was a really great question from an attendee that asked about how that entity is created over there. That entity is created through the combination of this better together between APM and IRM. And so we leverage that workflow to create that entity over there. It's really cool stuff. So now application X is created, and I've got an entity over in my GRC world, application X. And I start to get these details about this application because Doug's filling this questionnaire out. You know, what are the customers involved? Whether there's, where's the data located? How long am I having this there? If you go to the next slide, Doug, you'll start to see more around this questionnaire. And you notice I've picked on privacy a little bit because we're going to talk about that privacy. Privacy is really important to a lot of people right now, whether it's PII data, PHI data, whatever it might be. I'm going to look at payment card information today and talk about that card number, card order name. So what I'm saying here is this application manages cardholder data, right? That's really important to understand that that's theirs. So if that's the case, I've got some PCI requirements around this, right? If it was health information, I might have some HIPAA requirements around it. If it was PII data, I may have some California privacy or GDPR requirements around it, right? From a privacy perspective. But this risk identification questionnaire helps drive the information that we're going to get out of this. So now that we've done that, let's go in as that risk analyst and look at this. So this is the old days where, you know, Doug, I would be calling you on the phone and saying, answer these questions for me. You know, I've been bugging you for weeks to answer these questions. I really need these questions answered. And I call you or I email you and you're out of office. And, you know, it's that back and forth that gets frustrating. this is on the platform. And so the work you did, I get to view it. That's a really cool part. So let's take a look at what that looks like. You can see here, the first is, here I am, I'm Karen, I'm logged in, I'm this risk person. I get visibility into my workflow and what's being done and what's not being done using, these feature-rich dashboards, using performance analytics and bringing information in. The key to a lot of this is that visibility into it. My boss isn't asking me where my work is done. My boss is, seeing it in a dashboard that's live, actionable, that's updated all the time. So go to the next slide, and let's step more into this process. So here I am doing this assessment, and you can see the life cycle. Everything in ServiceNow has a life cycle. You'll hear that a lot. And that life cycle, right now I'm in a review stage, right? So I can view the responses for that application on it. And you see I have an inherent assessment here, and I could turn in a control assessment, a residual assessment. That workflow is flexible, so I can do a lot of different things. But what I'm looking at here are those responses, right? And right from here, I can see some of what Doug has responded to within this application and take action on what Doug has responded to. I can even reject this and say, you know what, Doug, I think these answers don't seem right. Let's reject this and send it back to you. I can even do that if I wanted to, because I don't trust you all the time, Doug. You don't seem like that type.
Not trustworthy.
So go ahead. Let's now move through the process, right? I looked at your responses. Now let's assess that inherent risk. Because I asked you a bunch of other questions too around it, right? That confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So let's see what that looks like on that inherent assessment. And you can see on this inherent assessment that I've triggered some scores already automatically, because I use what's called automated factors that build out that confidentiality, availability, and integrity impact. So based on your responses, my identification has already started. My risk analysis has already started for me automatically based on configurations that I've set up on scores that I've agreed with everybody in the organization. This is me reaching out to compliance and everybody else, the application owners, saying, look, if you answer these questions this way, this is going to be your score, right? And so I move through that assessment, and I answer a few more questions on my side, right? That threat impact, that threat capability, all the different pieces, what's the probability? And I get this computed criticality score, right? This high score that talks about why this application is the risk that's providing me based on what you told me. I'm not going to give you something and have you say, Greg, I don't understand why you're giving me this score. Why is this a high score? Well, I'm giving you this because you told me, you saw what you told me, based on what you told me, this is a score. And you start to get that agreement back and forth. There's no battle in between the business unit and the risk team. You bring it all on the same page with it. So let's finish down through this life cycle, Doug, and see some more of this, where I'm going to come in and review, get some sign off on this inherent risk. I need to go back to the business unit and say, do you approve of this risk, right? And based on that risk rating, I'm going to map some controls and recommendations. I'm going to use a state-of-the-art recommendation engine that I absolutely love, and we'll see some of that, and map some of those controls and risks and policies and everything back to the control owner. So let's see what that looks like. You can see here, I asked you questions around credit card data, and you responded that there were cardholder and cardholder name, right? And based on your response, I automatically mapped these information objects to this application, right? And these information objects reside over in your world, right? In APM, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. That's part of our data model for APM and part of our structure around technology portfolio management, the application portfolio management, the business capability, and that fourth one is really that information management within application portfolio management.
Yeah, so think about this could be driver's license number, this could be bio information around privacy. A lot of different things could be mapped to this. And the reason I like this is I'm, as a risk officer, as a compliance officer, I'm going to take advantage of what you just told me by using those same information objects and map those information objects to policies, to controls, to citations, to risks. And now I allow myself to be able to look in your world, because you have this data, I have this state-of-the-art recommendation engine that's going to recommend to me as an information officer, security officer, implement these risks, implement these controls. Doesn't mean you have to, But if it's PCI, there's a good chance I want to implement PCI controls around this, right? So let's see what that looks like. If I take this into this is where I'm bringing those information objects in. And I'm going to do my risk mapping and my citation and policy mapping and control mapping based on the application and based on the data that you've brought into that world. So if I step through, I'm going to do the risk mapping and I'm going to do some, association with citations. And here, what I'm doing is the system itself is recommending these citations to me because of that information object, right? So I'm not going out and trying to hunt and peck and, willy-nilly picking out different controls. The application, the IRM application is doing this for me, utilizing those recommendation engine and that information object that you told me that there's credit card data. If there was PHI data behind this same citation would be associated to HIPAA, right? Or high trust or whatever it might be that you're working within your environment, or even privacy citations associated with this as well. And I can do the same thing from a policy standpoint. So if I've got a bunch of control objectives that are tied to policies, I'm going to choose certain policies, right? A change management policy, intrusion detection policy, whatever it might be, remote access, right? So these policies have control objectives that have controls and citations associated to them. So I can map these policies directly to this particular application, what we call an entity over in our IRM world that I build around this application. And then when I do this is, for me, I used to be an application owner, right? My background, I was a developer. I wrote applications. I go way back in the day. I won't tell you what language I developed in, but what this does for me is it gives me a warm feeling because I'm pushing these controls down to the controller, right? Doug, I'm sure in your life at some point, an auditor somewhere is beating you up, asking you, give me the idea that you have a firewall implemented, or give me the idea that you have encryption implemented, right? And how are you going to provide that evidence, right? I can initiate these attestations directly from here.
Yeah, and I think the real advantage here is also displaying that within the context of the application as well, so that the application owner who's more focused on looking at it from that lens, they have direct access to these same controls.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So there was a question about those entity types within GRC and whether this eliminates it. It does not. It enhances those entity types. So based on the risk, I'm going to have an entity type that this is a critical application based on the score, and I'm going to put it in that entity type, right? And this is where I can start to map those controls and everything associated with that. So now let's move into those controls and what those controls look like and what those attestation looks like and the automation around this. I joke around, I spent 20, 25 years doing this in a large financial firm, working in different ways as an application guy, a network guy, network security, firewall guy, worked in NOCs and SOCs and all that stuff. And I would go to lunch with everybody, right? You and I, Doug, would go to lunch together. But then when I became an auditor, people stopped taking me to lunch. I'd walk in a room and conversations would stop, right? You would stop talking to me, Doug, in the old world. And I joke about ServiceNow knocking these silos down between this first, second, third line of defense that you can start taking your auditors to lunch. And I'll show you how this works. So these attestations, what you're looking at here, Doug, is your attestations associated to this application in your view, right? This is your application view.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got an application you can see on the top there. And if I go in as the application owner to actually complete one of these, I might say I'm compliant and I can attach evidence of how I'm compliant, answer some questions. In this case, I'm responding that I'm not compliant. And then Greg, maybe you can walk us through the results.
Yeah, so think about that. You've said you're non-compliant with this particular control. I get immediate visibility in my compliance world because I've tied those controls to a compliance framework. I can see that I'm non-compliant with a particular framework. And I can immediately from here trigger off exception process, right? So if you say you're non-compliant, let's set up a policy exception or a control exception with a lifecycle around it, right? So look, this is a new application. I haven't got all my ducks in a row. I don't have that encryption you talked about. I don't I'm not salting my password with whatever it might be, but I can do that in 3 months. So give me 3 months to do that, but let's make it visible to everybody and see what the risks are, because this control is tied to a particular risk. And if I do a risk assessment against an application and I tie controls to it and I say, I'm great, but then I put my head in the sand and I'm not monitoring those controls in real time, when a control fails, I want to argue with you that you aren't achieving that residual risk score that you might think you are, because these controls become non-compliant or compliant over time. And at ServiceNow, we have the idea of monitoring these controls in real time as things happen. And so you can start to see the life cycle around this, and not just from a business owner, but an application owner, a line of business, but a risk officer, a compliance officer, get that same view into this. We're sharing that information across the enterprise.
Great. So let's just take a look at the overall process, and we won't walk through all the steps again, but basically we've walked through this entire process to show how it can be supported using both APM and IRM.
Yeah, absolutely. This was one of my favorite Better Together stories. We have a lot of these Better Together stories. We're going to talk about a couple more here in just a second, but this one really resonated with me because I was an application developer for a long time. And having this automated in the way that it is, and bringing those different first, second, third lines of defense together, is really a lot of fun. It's really resonating with our customers when we show this.
100%.
Yeah, and Greg, I'm going to chime in here. Speaking of that Better Together, I'm sure I can speak for Doug and say we'd be happy to take you to lunch. So appreciate you joining us today. This lab, I understand that we have a great Knowledge 21 lab that will be available in 11 days, 11 hours, and 6 minutes. I'm watching on the website that actually walks through what you discussed with.
Yeah. So a couple of my peers took this and made an absolutely phenomenal lab so you'll get some hands-on where you can register for it and actually walk through this yourself in an instance, walking through the different lab guides that they've got around this. And they've done a phenomenal job. I'm playing one of the gurus on it, but yeah, it will definitely resonate if you are living in this world at all, whether you're an application owner and you don't know anything about risk, or if you're a risk or compliance officer and don't know anything about application development. It brings those two together in a phenomenal way. It's a really good lab.
And I'm going to post in the chat, in case anybody didn't get it, I have a list of, I think I just posted it. And Lisa, if I didn't, I just posted a list where you can actually get a link to that lab so you can watch it, register for it, as well as some of the other resources that I'll be talking about in a second.
Great. I'll do that right now.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. Yeah, so Knowledge kicks off in 11 days. We encourage you to register for that. And I think if
Before we move on, if I could, Lisa, real quick, answer a question on this. So, Deborah, that they're asking about, and this is a phenomenal question. This is our bread and butter of what we do. They're asking about the opportunities to automate control tests and attestations, right, around change management.
Yeah.
That trigger that Doug and I talked about, right, Doug, from a trigger perspective, it's a new application that's going in. But think about if you're an application owner and you're going to make a change on that application. I can take that same opportunity to ask you those questions again because you opened up a change record, right? You may have a certain amount of data behind this application, but now you're going to change those information objects, and I can capture that in the change. It's a really great opportunity to do that in both the change world, but also for new applications as well.
Awesome. Thanks.
So that is, go ahead, Deborah.
Sorry, I was just saying thank you.
Oh, absolutely. But the Better Together story does not end there. So that's a great use case. Next, we're going to talk about another really use case is assessing project risk using integrated risk management advanced risk assessment. So the capabilities here is really the integration of project risks with enterprise risks. There's a standard project risk library. There's flexible risk assessment workflow and scoring, and risk aggregation and visualization. And that's them. And the key personas that are here, project managers. So they're basically the ones who are identifying risks, but from this case, they're actually doing it from a project lens, identifying these risks. And we also have the project risk owners, the people who are actually responsible for these risks. And then we have enterprise risk managers who need visibility into risks from projects, especially if they end up being enterprise risks. A good example that I think of often is, at a project level, we might identify, hey, this is a new vendor that we're working with. We don't know what it's like to work with them. That's a bit of a risk on this project, but that's actually an enterprise risk, the fact that we've got this new vendor.
We talked about this, like bringing those people together, right? That better together, bringing those different first, second, third. This is another example of doing that, bringing all those people into that visibility for that.
Exactly. Yeah, this is exactly right. And I can't tell you, prior to coming to ServiceNow in my PPM world, how many times people would ask us that. Is like, how do you associate project risks to enterprise risks? And I never had a good answer for them, but coming to ServiceNow, there was always the ability to relate these together. And now we're helping customers do this out of the box, which is fantastic. So some of the things that you'll be able to see on this screen is some of the visualizations that exist now in the project world, so that people can see things like inherent risk heat map, or there's a new dashboard with project risk overview, but leveraging this advanced content that we get from IRM. And then here, what we're looking at is a project, and we're specifically looking at a specific risk on that project, and they can select that risk to look at more details. And here you can see there is an option to elevate this to an enterprise risk. And that is going to allow us to do a few things. It's going to allow us to workflow that based on the IRM workflows. It's going to allow us to leverage any libraries from the IRM team around types of risks. And it automatically provides visibility to that enterprise risk team. So that check of that button is basically instant visibility to the risk team to bring these together. So that is a very powerful integration. Greg, were you going to say something on that?
I was just going to say, yeah, this is where, now that you've mapped it over to there, I get visibility and I can apply those controls that we talked about, right? In that application, I can start applying those controls to this risk right from day one. So it's right in the project area.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also a third use case we want to touch on quickly today as well, which is how IRM or GRC teams can improve audit engagements by managing them as projects, literally leveraging our project management capabilities from ITBM. So what we're seeing here is an engagement, but we can see that this is actually linked now to say we're using this from a project capability. And that's going to provide a really good experience for them to manage this. And within here, you can see we have dates now that are related from a project perspective. We also see within this engagement, you'll see at the top, now below, we have all the project management capabilities. So very often we have customers saying, for that engagement, I want to be able to manage costs around that, or I need to do better resource management, or I need to do better status reporting. What's also powerful here is now these are visible within our project management views, whether that's a program, portfolio, or roadmap view. That work now becomes visible with other project work that we're doing at the same time.
Yeah, as an auditor, if you think about the number of audits that are going out within my enterprise, right? I've got my SOX audit, I've got my PCI auditors, internal audits. You may have 200 to 500 audits going on throughout the year, and that resource planning and understanding the visibility. I need an IT specialist or an application specialist auditor. Who is it on my team that I can assign that? Are they going to be out on vacation? What's going on? What's that resource planning? What are the costs associated with all these audits, right? Because audit is a cost structure around that. I don't know that I've ever seen an environment where you make money out of doing audits, right? But you're saving so much time and showing the resources you've got by bringing this project piece to it. It's really pretty amazing on what the visibility brings to this.
Yeah, Deborah and I are going to have to capture that lunch that we're taking you out for in the cost of this as well.
The cost.
Of course. Absolutely. Yeah. And I just have to say thanks so much, Greg and Doug, for that great presentation on how APM and PPM work so much better together with integrated risk management. And just as a recap, just wanted to point out, we saw how ITBM integration with GRC or IRM helps a variety of personas across the organization, from risk managers all the way to business leaders. We saw how it enables application owners to manage the application risk lifecycle with improved efficiency and better communication and insights. And we saw how project managers can better assess and track project risks with advanced risk management, and how audit engagements can be better managed as projects for better user experience for engagement managers and other stakeholders. And in our last few minutes, I'd just like to point out our resource list, which we've also, Lisa posted in the chat. And it includes links to the 3 applications Doug and Greg discussed today, as well as all supporting materials. And these are all available on store.servicenow.com. You'll see information about the application, as well as several links to documentation and training. There's also a link to docs.servicenow.com where you'll find documentation on these applications. Doug and I did a 3-minute, very high-level video that just kind of recaps what we went over today at a very high level, if you want to check that out on YouTube. And finally, there's a link to the lab that we talked about. We do encourage you to check that out. I think it'll be very informative and very helpful. It'll hit home what we went through today. And that'll be available again in 11 days. And then finally, I'd like to invite you all to join us on the last Thursday of every month, when we'll present a webinar on new ITBM capabilities or enhancements to existing applications. And our next webinar features Doug again. It's ITBM Product Roadmap on May 27th. And Doug will present this along with Pradeep Bansal, who's our ITBM Director of Product Management. And that's going to provide an overview of what our customers can look forward to on the ITBM product roadmap. And with that, unless we have any more questions, if you do have some questions, pop them in right now. If not, just wait a minute. And if not, I think that's pretty much all the time we have anyway. So again, thank you, Doug and Greg. Appreciate it and hope to see you all next month.
One
Please,
second, real quick.
please show the links again.
Could you show the links again?
Oh, we do have.
Yeah, I had a question there from someone that would like to see those links again.
Oh, sure. And we did post them in the chat window. So you should
Hit
be
it one more time right there.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I have it live. This is going to be posted, so there's proof that they owe me lunch. Just keep that in mind.
We do.
This is great. Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it, Doug.
Thanks, Greg. That was great.